A little while ago, I made a video trying to complete as much as possible in 12 hours in Fire Emblem Fate's Birthright. I was a little disappointed to see that some people didn't like that video, but I was really interested in trying out the same idea with a different game. Really gonna try to win you over this time. I had thought about maybe Fire Emblem Engage or Shin Megami Tensei 5, but I honestly wanted to revisit Fates. I had thought about trying out Conquest, but full transparency, I'm just not good at that game, so that's when I got the idea to try out the Revelations route. I'm not super familiar with the Revelations path. I finished it about 2 or 3 times, so I knew in the back of my mind this one would take longer. I even replayed Revelations before this video just to get myself more familiar with the maps and gameplay. Unlike last time, my goals for this playthrough are going to be much more manageable. In the Birthright run, one of my main goals was to recruit every unit in that game. However, for anyone who is unaware, the Revelations route of Fates combines both rosters of Birthright and Conquest, meaning this game has over 65 units to recruit. If I couldn't recruit everyone in 12 hours of Birthright, there was no way I could come anywhere close to recruiting everyone in 12 hours of Revelations. So this time around, my only goal is to complete the main story. That's all. I think the reason why I felt a little sad at the end of 12 hours of Birthright is because I was disappointed I couldn't complete all the goals I set for myself, so I think setting a more achievable goal will make things feel a little less stressful. Before we get started with the run, let's talk about the rules. For obvious reasons, New Game Plus isn't allowed. I am allowed to use Branch of Fate, which I'll explain soon, but other than that, I have to use a fresh save file. I also am not allowed to grind for EXP. Grinding for experience would make my units way too strong, making this run easier, so it isn't allowed. Next, I am allowed to use DLC as long as they don't give my units a significant buff. And for the final rule, speedrunning through the game isn't allowed. I want to see how much I can accomplish by playing through the game as normally as possible, so speeding through it isn't allowed. With the rules set and painfully long intro over, let's see how much I can accomplish in 12 hours of Fire Emblem Fates Revelations. Before I can get started with the game, I have to choose a difficulty and make an avatar. Similarly to last time, I'll be playing on normal mode. I'm just trying to see how much I can get done in 12 hours, so I don't really think turning up the difficulty will really add much of anything to the experience. This time around, I decided to use a female Corrin, only because I almost always play as male Corrin, so I thought this would kinda shake things up a bit. After creating my Corrin, I started a new game using the Branch of Fate. For anyone who is unfamiliar, the Branch of Fate lets you skip the first 5 chapters before you choose which route you play. Some might call this unfair, however, I disagree since it pulls things like levels, items, and most importantly, game time from your most recent save file. So even though I didn't actually play the early chapters, I still have almost 30 minutes on the save file, which I'll of course count for this video. Getting started with Chapter 6, this one is really easy. The goal is to defeat the enemy commanders, which is something I thought would be pretty difficult. However, Corrin and Jacob took care of them really easily, so I made my way over to Chapter 7. Before I got started with the chapter, however, I made use of the Gift from Anna and another Gift from Anna DLC. With these DLCs, I gain access to a Witch's Mark, the Paragon skill, and a pair of boots. Later on in the run, I end up giving the Witch's Mark to Orochi and the Paragon skill to Sakura. Orochi does very well as a witch, and Sakura usually needs the boost in EXP because she doesn't gain all that much by just healing. Anyways, as for Chapter 7, this one really isn't that hard. It's mostly just here to let Azura and Jacob catch up on levels if they're super far behind. I let Corrin take care of most of the enemies, while also relying on Jacob's dual strike. With this setup, this chapter is no problem. Near the end of the map, Gunther joins our army, I defeat the boss, then move over to Chapter 8. This chapter does look a little scary at the start, due to the high density of enemies. However, if you just bait them out one at a time, this map is actually really manageable. During this chapter, I started to notice that Corrin was surprisingly tanking almost every enemy that she came across, which is something I'm not used to seeing. Once I made my way to the boss, I took him down with a lucky crit, then moved on to Chapter 9. I wasn't looking forward to this chapter, only because of the wind gimmick. Every few turns, a gust of wind will push your units up or down the map. Credit where credit is due, this is an interesting and unique mechanic, however, I'm just not a fan. Other than the wind, this chapter actually isn't too bad. As long as you pace yourself and try to avoid the wind, it's more than doable. Once I made my way to the boss though, things took a turn for the worst. I was hardly doing any damage to the boss, and even when I did, he would just heal it the next turn. I was just sitting there doing chip damage for seriously 15 minutes. 15 minutes may not sound like a lot of time, but oh my gosh, it felt like hours. After dealing chip damage for almost 30 turns, I was eventually able to kill the boss, then move on to Chapter 10. Chapter 10 is the infamous snow shoveling map. Even though most people say this one is annoying, it's honestly not too bad. Most enemies are fairly spread out, so I was able to just focus on the boss. Thankfully, unlike last time, this boss went down super easily, so I was able to make my way over to Chapter 11. If you saw the Birthright video, you'll know that Ninja Village is one of my least favorite maps in this game, so of course, I wasn't really excited to play through this one again. This map is full of enemies that can chip away at your unit's health, so being cautious is really important for this one. Thankfully, in the Revelations version of this map, you can use a Dragon Vein to lower the spike traps, so that helps out a little bit. During this chapter, I made sure to over-rely on my more tanky units to kill the enemies, while letting my other units finish off whoever they could. Overall, this chapter wasn't too hard, it was just a bit slow and tedious. Moving over to Chapter 12, this one is super easy. All I had to do was pair up Korin and Tsubaki and fly over to the boss. Near the end, all these enemies kept getting in my way when I tried attacking Flora, but other than that, this chapter wasn't a problem. Chapter 13 was also fairly easy. This map is full of choke points, so killing the enemies wasn't hard at all. I was also able to use some of the choke points to gain some extra levels for some of my weaker units. After making my way to the boss, they went down easily and I continued on to Chapter 14. This chapter, for the most part, isn't too bad, as long as you don't overextend. There's lots of enemies in this chapter, however, as long as you bait small groups of them to your units, you can finish them off without that much trouble. Honestly, the only annoying part of this map is recruiting Charlotte and Benny, since they're on opposite sides of the map, but other than that, it's not too bad. Taking a step back from the video for a second, check out this cool Lego set I just finished building. For anyone who might not know what it is, it's a tall neck from Horizon Zero Dawn, and honestly, I just think it looks really cool. I've talked about the Horizon games 1 or 2 times on this channel, but honestly, I think the games are really good, so I was really happy to get my hands on this set. This isn't really related to anything about the video, but I just think it looks really cool, so I thought I'd share. Anyways, getting back on track, Chapter 15 is another tedious map since you have to slowly move your units from room to room to gain access to the boss. It's not that this chapter is hard, if anything it's on the easier side, but I just don't like the slow pace of it. Once I got to the room the boss was in, Korin took him down and I continued on to Chapter 16. This chapter is where we gain access to Ryoma and Hinoka, 2 units who are very useful. Ryoma makes light work out of pretty much every enemy he comes across, and Hinoka's just the GOAT. I don't make the rules, that's just how it is. While this chapter might seem threatening due to the walls of fire, as long as you pair up Ryoma and Hinoka and have her fly him over to the boss, this chapter can be finished really quickly. Unfortunately for me though, Chapter 17 isn't as easy. One issue I have with the Fates games is that its idea of challenge is just throwing a bunch of strong enemies at your units and expecting you to just deal with it. While it does increase the difficulty, it just feels really lazy and cheap to me, and this chapter is where you can start to see that. After an excessive amount of reinforcements appear, we gain access to Xander and Leo, 2 more units who will be extremely valuable for this run. After slowly making my way through the horde of enemies, Korin was able to kill the boss, and I made my way over to Chapter 18. Chapter 18 is manageable, but man, it's just slow and boring. You're supposed to use all the Dragon Veins to open up a teleporter to gain access to the boss room, but oh my gosh, is this just really slow. Even though this chapter took almost an hour to finish, I was able to kill the boss, then continue on to chapter 19. Thankfully, this chapter is a lot easier compared to the last two. The goal for this map is to have all your units reach the escape point on the other side of the map. Even though this map is full of enemies, I let Orochi, Korn, and Xander clear a path for everyone else, which made things a lot easier. Once all my units escaped, I was able to move over to chapter 20. Honestly, there's not too much to mention in this chapter. Similarly to other chapters, as long as you don't overstep and take your time, this one isn't too noteworthy. My main strategy was to pair up my tanky units like Korn and Xander with flyers like Hinoka and Tsubaki. They were able to clear out some of the more threatening enemies, while my other units like Hinata and Rinka cleaned up whoever was left. After Hinoka took down the boss, I continued on to chapter 21. This map is a little tricky because if you're not careful, you can easily be overwhelmed by the high amount of enemies. I decided to make Ryoma cover up this choke point at the top of the map, take out as many enemies as I could, then send my other units to clear out the room. Once I did that, the rest of this chapter wasn't too bad. Most of the enemies will try attacking you in small groups, so it's really easy to deal with them one at a time. Near the end, I had to watch out for these archers, since they could easily kill my flyers, but I was able to deal with them pretty quickly. Once I made my way to the boss, I defeated him fairly easily, then continued on to chapter 22. Chapter 22 was a little tricky, only because I kinda messed up and let some of my units die. I sent a large group of my allies to attack the boss, then let a smaller group take care of the enemies near this path so the bigger group wouldn't get attacked from behind. I thought it was a decent enough plan, but unfortunately Laszlo and Camilla didn't survive for too long. Even Leo was having some trouble defeating them, which was a little surprising. Even though they were struggling, my other units had no issues taking down the boss, so I continued on to chapter 23. Chapter 23 is extremely similar to chapter 20 in terms of design and atmosphere. I honestly thought my game glitched and sent me back to a different map, but nope, they are seriously just that similar. I kinda hate repeating myself this much, but this chapter went down fairly easily, since it was basically just a repeat of a previous chapter. Chapter 24, however, is a bit more challenging. The gimmick of this map is that if you choose the wrong door, your units lose a massive chunk of their health. I got lucky with the first door, but sadly guessed wrong on the second door. Even if a lot of my units were on low health, this gave my staff users a lot of extra EXP, so it wasn't completely bad. When I got to the final door, things got a little awkward. The entrance to the door is set up like a choke point, but you can still get attacked by multiple enemies since they can attack you through the walls on the right. I did sadly lose Azura, but immediately afterwards was able to kill the boss, so hey, we take those, I guess. Moving forward to chapter 25, oh my gosh, do I hate this map. What you're supposed to do is use the elevators to gain access to the dragon vein so you can destroy the chains that's holding the other room that the boss is in. Is this annoying and tedious? Yes, absolutely, but you know what? I'm used to that. What makes this map so annoying is the high amount of enemies that can easily overpower all of your units. I know I complained about this earlier, but seriously, flooding the map with enemies is such an unfair way of creating challenge. I actually had to restart this map 3 times, that's how hard it was. In spite of all of that though, I developed a strategy where I let Xander and Ryoma sit at the elevator door so they could defeat as many enemies as they could and clear a path to gain access to the dragon veins. After almost 20 minutes of slowly making my way through these enemies, I was able to use all the dragon veins, then finally gain access to the boss room. You might think, after all that trouble, I'd be given a break, right? Nope, according to the game, I haven't suffered enough because once again it fills these hallways with even more enemies. Thankfully, I was able to defeat them fairly quickly, but oh my gosh, I was just so over this map. After over 40 minutes of genuine torture, I was able to defeat the boss, then continue on to the next chapter. Chapter 26 isn't too bad, it just requires patience. While a lot of enemies will attack you as much as possible, you're given these blue tiles that give you extra avoid and even heal you at the start of your turn. In all honesty, this chapter was a nice break from the last one, since most enemies were going down really quickly. Similarly to my Birthright run, I sent in Ryoma to take care of all the enemies blocking the boss, and like usual, he takes them all down with very little resistance. Even though the boss put up a good fight, he eventually went down and I moved on to the next chapter. Chapter 27 is less forgiving than Chapter 26, since this map is full of tough enemies. While I was losing units left and right, I was really only focused on getting Korin and Ryoma to the boss. I let Ryoma and Korin get its health down, then let Leo deliver the killing blow. Once the boss goes down, we are then thrown straight into the final boss battle. Even though I think Revelations has the weakest maps in the Fates trilogy, you gotta admit, this boss battle is easily the best. Our first goal is to take down both of the hands, so then we can gain access to the head. I let Ryoma, Xander, and Korin focus on the hands, while I let everyone else take care of the enemy reinforcements. Xander and Korin came really close to dying, but they were able to deplete both of the hands' health bar. When it came to attacking the head, I had to over-rely on Korin, since it seemed like the Omega Yato was the only weapon that could deal a significant amount of damage. Thankfully, Korin defeated the head with little issue, so all that was left was the final third phase. I wanted to make sure I played this as well as I could, since one slip-up meant that most of my units would be killed by the reinforcements. After a little careful planning, I was able to pull it off. Finally, after 10.5 hours, I was able to finish the main campaign. This honestly felt really good to finally complete. I may not have played through the game perfectly, but I was satisfied with the fact that I got it done. Now that the main story was over, I decided to turn my attention to recruiting as many units as I could in the hour and a half I had left. Similarly to last time, the first unit I recruited was Mozu. All the enemies in her chapter are super weak, so I was able to recruit her and finish the map really quickly. The next unit I decided to recruit was Dwyer, only because he's another unit that's really easy to obtain. All you need to do to recruit him is have Jacob talk to Dwyer, then defeat the boss. Getting to Dwyer is super easy, so all I had to do was focus on the boss. Despite the fact I accidentally let Camilla get killed by an archer I completely overlooked, I was able to kill the boss without any issues, then move on to another paralogue. Since I had Korin and Tsubaki marry each other for this run, I thought why not try to recruit Kaldori. This chapter is a little complicated due to the threatening enemies all over the map. Of course, my tanky units like Korin, Hinoka, and Ryoma could take them down super easily, but a decent amount of my units were actually pretty weak compared to the enemies. Sadly, a lot of my healers and staff bots were killed during the enemy phase, which is something I expected to happen, but still kinda sucks. What I ended up doing was using Ryoma and Xander to cover up these choke points to let them take care of as many enemies as possible, then use Korin, Hinoka, and Kaldori to kill whoever was left. You know, now that I think about it, it seems like my default strategy is to use choke points whenever there's a high amount of enemies. It may be cheap, but hey, as long as it works, that's all I really care about. After defeating a good chunk of enemies, Camilla was able to kill the boss, and I successfully recruited Kaldori. Something I wanted to just throw out there is that Kaldori dodged every single attack that was directed at her. That's not really important for anything, I just thought it was pretty cool. The next map I decided to tackle was Sigurd's chapter. I think I've only done this chapter one time in my entire life, so I was a little nervous to start this one. Thankfully, most of the enemies are pretty spaced out, so you can take on most of the enemies at your own pace. This chapter honestly wasn't that hard. Most of the enemies will attack you one at a time, and there's a lot of space to work with. The high amount of reinforcements near the end did slow me down a bit, but it wasn't anything too stressful. Once I defeated all the enemies, I used all the dragon veins and was able to finish Siegbert's map. The next map I ended up trying was Kana's Paralogue. I'm going to be completely honest for a second. Most of the time, this chapter scares me. Whenever I play it, I almost always get overwhelmed by the high amount of enemies. Even when I rely on Ryoma to tank most of the enemies, it still is really challenging. The only reason why I wanted to try it was because I thought I had a good amount of strong units like Siegbert and Caldori to help defeat some of the enemies. What I decided to do for this map was send Ryoma near the bottom of the map, so he could take care of as many enemies as possible. I then let Xander and Leo clear out the sides of the map, then used whoever was left to support them. To my surprise, this actually ended up being a really good strategy since all the enemies were defeated really quickly. By the second turn, most of the enemies were gone, so I really only had to focus on the small amount of enemies that were left. After a couple more easy turns, all the enemies were defeated and I was able to complete the chapter. Once I saved my game, I saw that I only had 5 minutes left until the 12 hours were over. Unlike last time, I actually felt somewhat satisfied with how this run ended. I think lowering my expectations for myself helped make me feel more content once the 12 hours came to an end. I think if I was a bit more familiar with the maps in this route, I would have been able to finish the game faster, leaving me with more time to finish up more side content after the campaign. Even though I wasn't able to complete as much as last time, I honestly feel pretty good about what I was able to accomplish this time around. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. I know it was a bit different from my usual stuff, but I honestly kind of like making these 12-hour videos, so I hope you guys like them too. Feel free to check out some of my other videos. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. I love you, and I will see you all later.